Welcome to the very clean, very green and very impressive city of Singapore. Now, you see that weird looking building over my shoulder? Looks like 3 skyscrapers with a boat on top. Let's go up there and have a look around. Singapore has a fantastic mix of cultures, and just one look out to all the ships at sea tells you that this is a major hub for world trade. It's also, of course, a major financial centre. Now, its importance as a port is the reason why an Englishman called Stamford Raffles first raised the British flag here in the early 1800s. He did so basically on behalf of the East India Company, who wanted to outdo the Dutch in the colonial plunder of the world's resources and markets. Now, as a British colony, I can say with confidence that this would have been the site of many crimes and horrors meted out by the British on the native population. But of course, British colonial rule was interrupted here during the Second World War, when the British were forced to surrender to the Japanese. And weirdly, that decision to surrender was taken in a bunker, which is more or less directly underneath the stage that we're going to be playing on tonight at Fort Canning. The period of Japanese rule here in Singapore was, by all accounts, a pretty dark one, and I think it's fair to assume that a growing number of people in Singapore realised that what they wanted was neither British colonialism or Japanese imperialism, but independence. Therefore, when, at the end of the Second World War, the British returned, their days as colonial masters were numbered. After agitation by the Communist Party, strikes and demonstrations, Singapore finally gained its full independence in 1959. And other than a brief and troubled spell in the 1960s when it tried to unify with Malaysia, Singapore has remained independent ever since. Now, I haven't really formulated an answer to this, but being somewhere like this makes me question what independence really means in the modern world, because as I look around this part of Orchard Road, all the brand names that I see are familiar to all of us. I can see TGI Fridays, McDonald's, Ben & Jerry's, 7-Eleven. Colonialism has ended in this part of the world, but it's still a small number of huge foreign companies who really dominate the economy. And of course, American capital isn't the only show in town. You remember that building that we were standing on top of? Well, the promoter told me that that is a huge casino and hotel complex which was built primarily to attract Chinese holidaymakers and gamblers. Now, the government here is pretty authoritarian. Amnesty International will remind you that a lot of people get executed in Singapore. And I think it's only reluctantly that the government recently legalised gambling in an attempt to bolster the economy here. Now, Bav, the woman working at the bar behind me, didn't want to say this on camera, but she just told me that predictably enough there is another Singapore to the rather opulent one that we have seen. She told me that just a 5-minute train ride out of the centre you come across quite crushing poverty, often experienced by people from countries like the Philippines and Thailand, and many of the women from those families have no option but to work as prostitutes in the city. Prostitution, she told me, is rife here. Sure enough, when a few of us wanted to go for a late drink after the show, we were told that the only place that would be open was a bar brothel complex known locally as 4 Floors of Whores. I don't quite know how to sum up my scattered impressions of Singapore, other than to say that this is a spectacular place. For all the dark chapters in its history, capitalism and world trade has created many great wonders, and I feel like Singapore is one of them. But there's a seedy side here that serves to remind us that even in wealthy economic centres like this, modern corporate capitalism seems to be either unwilling or unable to close the enormous economic gap that exists between the haves and the have-nots.